Okay, so this is Dale Ritterbush's poem Conversation, which is on page 26 of the course pack. And so presumably these are two guys who are sitting in a bar at the bar. Who knows? He says, "You've never seen anything unless you've seen a man hit in the chest with an RPG round." I said, "I guess not," and drank on into the heavy Asian night, weighted and packed. I thought how many times you could say, "You've never seen anything unless you've seen," and then go on, just fill in the blanks. An F4 Phantom drop napalm along a tree line. An illumination round light up the perimeter as night probes catch in the outer defenses. Body bags lined up at the edge of the road. Pad. Rotors rippling the plastic as they descend. And I said, long after that night, after I'd felt their names carved in that stone, "You've never seen anything. Anything. Anything." Okay, so Dale wrote an article at one point where he's very attuned to popular culture, and he used this sort of phrase, one of the famous phrases from Get Smart, where I don't know if you're familiar with probably not. I don't know. They rebooted Get Smart with Steve Carell, right? And I don't know. Get Smart was very much of its time. It was funny at the time, but I think you also had to be like 8 years old. And when you go back and look, you're like, oh man, this is not funny at all. It's very stagey and it's very slow paced. I mean, we've really speeded things up a great deal. But one of the things that Get Smart was famous for was that he would get caught in some kind of trap, and then he would say, there are 30 ferocious agents just outside the door, and the enemy would say, "Oh, please, Mr. Smart, do you think I'm going to buy that?" He would say, "Would you believe 10 agents and 3 dogs?" And they would say, they would say, "No, it's ridiculous." He'd say, "Would you believe, one grandmother?" And just that kind of thing. So he would saying, "Would you believe? Would you believe?" And Dale really, so he worked this into, is like, well, basically, what did McNamara sound like? And so he sort of would pull this together. It's like, would you believe, or Westmoreland, would you believe that we'll be nearly victorious in Vietnam by late 1968? Would you believe late 1969? Would you believe 2010? It's that kind of thing. So this is the same kind of thing where Dale, digs into this ironic stuff here. So here's this guy who's sitting at the bar, who's trying to tell war stories, sort of gross you out war stories. And somebody's been hit in the chest with an RPG with a rocket-propelled grenade. It's just sort of going to disappear. And so the narrator isn't buying. He's not having any. He's like, I guess not. Like, we're not telling stories. He's seen enough, and he doesn't need to hear somebody else's horror stories, right? So, and then he begins to think about, how many times, what has he seen in Vietnam? You've never seen anything unless you've seen. And then he lists some of the things that he's seen, a napalm drop, illumination rounds, night probes, the body bags lined up by the pad as the helicopters come to take them away. And then he jumps ahead. The narrator jumps ahead and says, "I said long after that night." So this is after I'd felt their names carved in that stone. So this is the Vietnam Memorial, the wall. I'll put in an image of it here. This is the black memorial to Vietnam. And as I think I've talked about this, it's very, very touching and very impressive. I do recommend going to see it. If you're in Washington, you please go and see this thing. It's one of the most remarkable pieces of sculpture in the late 20th century. And it had a huge impact on the way that war memorials were going to be made after this. I mean, it changed everybody's ideas, notions of sort of what was coming. And so here he is touching the hands of the engraved dead, names of the engraved dead on the wall. Because everybody who died in Vietnam, as far as we know, is on this wall. They're slowly adding people that have been missed, but they've caught up. So there's 58,000 plus names engraved in this wall, and they're done chronologically. So you start at the beginning, and the war gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you get down to the bottom at the center, when the war is at its worst, and the wall is well above you, and you just feel suffocated. And then it slowly gets smaller and smaller as the war draws down, basically, until you get these last few people who died at the very end of the war. The people who died in 1975, or were added later. Now, as I've said before, the suicides are not on this wall, and this has become an enormous piece of discussion. Okay, so here he is touching a wall because they're engraved. The names are engraved, and you can take a rubbing from it. That's how it's designed. It's granite, so they'll give you a sheet of paper, and the Park Service will give you a sheet of paper and some charcoal, and you can take a rubbing of the name of the person that you came to visit, if that's what you did. And so he's touching these, and he's basically saying, "You've never seen anything, anything, anything," and he's moving along the wall because they're dead. So it's very touching, literally. Okay.